Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Velasquez. As Metropolitan Community College's Coordinator of International Intercultural Education, I welcome you to the first program we are offering in honor of Hispanic Latino Heritage Month. During National Heritage Month, we recognize the contributions made and the important presence of and Latino Americans in the United States. Hispanics have had a profound and positive influence on our country through their strong commitment to faith, family, hard work, and service. They have enhanced and shaped our national character with the centuries-old traditions that reflect the multi-ethnic and multicultural customs of their communities. Hispanic Heritage Month, whose roots go back to 1968, begins each September 15th, the anniversary of independence of 5 Latin American countries: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Mexico, Chile, and Belize also celebrate their independence days during this period, and Dia de la Raza is October 12th. The term Hispanic or Latino refers to Caribbean, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture or origin, regardless of race. Please silence your microphones during this presentation. And special thanks to the MCC libraries for their support and collaboration to identify and secure films throughout the year. Your continued attendance at International Intercultural Education programming could qualify you for recognition throughout the year. To be considered, complete the online evaluation and include your name and contact information. The online address will be in the chat and also on a slide at the end of the mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. Roxana Cortes-Mills, who is leading today's film discussion, is a managing attorney at the Immigrant Legal Center. She specializes in cases involving immigrant children and their families. Roxana earned her JD from the University of Nebraska College of Law in 2016 and was admitted to the Nebraska State Bar soon thereafter. Prior to attending law school, Roxana graduated magna cum laude from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, with majors in psychology, Latino Latin American studies, and Spanish. In her free time, she teaches immigration law at Metropolitan Community College and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Please welcome Ms. Roxana Cortes-Mills to introduce our film and then lead a discussion following the screening.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Can everyone hear me? I think you probably can. I am very delighted to be your discussion leader today. Like the introduction can probably tell you, I'm very passionate about immigration, immigrant-related issues, and I myself am an immigrant, so I think that gives a unique perspective. Today, we are going to watch a very, very interesting film. The name of the film is Santuario, which means sanctuary. And during this film, you are going to get a chance to see Juana's journey. You're going to be able to see her journey through seeking sanctuary in a church in Greensboro, North Carolina. Throughout the film, you're going to see the human side of what seeking sanctuary means, but also get exposed to some legal terms or legal concepts. The legal concepts can be a bit complicated and can be rooted in some basics of immigration law that not everyone might have. And so in order to better understand the film and Juana's situation as it compares to another character that is featured on the film, I want you to keep 3 questions in mind. The first question that I want you to think about while you watch the film is, what is sanctuary, or what is santuario? The second question that I want you to keep in mind is, Juana says during the film that she sought asylum in 1992. She says that she did that when she was running away from her home country. And so she's gone through a process already. And I want you to ask yourself, if she has been in this country for over 20 years and already sought sanctuary or already sought asylum, how come she's facing the situation that she's facing today? And lastly, you're going to see throughout the film that Juana has children who are able to visit her, who can come in and out of the church and are just free citizens who are not being targeted by immigration. So if her children are free to go back and forth and are not being targeted by immigration, I want you to ask yourself, how come those children have not petitioned for a visa for their mother? So having those questions in mind, I'm going to turn it over to either Barbara or Jason for the film to get started. I hope you guys thought that this film is as impactful as I thought. Some of the thoughts that come to mind is we got to see Juana as a human being, as a mother of 4 children, as a wife, as a grandmother, but most importantly, just as a simple, regular human being who is asking for 2 very, very simple things. The ability to stay in this country right next to her family, and a very, very tiny request, which is the ability to be able to work so that she can provide for herself and be self-sufficient. So think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. I don't think she's asking for anything impossible. I don't think she's asking for something that is way out of the ordinary. She just wants to be with her family and wants to be able to provide for her family. That's all. But that's not what is in the cards for her. That's not what her situation is. In the film, the journey started out with her being in sanctuary for, I remember, a couple of weeks, and then we saw months, and then we saw years, and now today she has been in sanctuary for over 3 years, and nothing has happened in her case. So before we start talking about the specifics of the film, let's go back to the first 3 questions that I posed to you all at the beginning of the film, or before we started the film. If you remember, before we started the film, I asked you to keep 3 things in mind to better, or 3 questions in mind to better understand Juana's situation and the immigration issues that are underlying her situation or that are affecting her situation. The first question was, what is sanctuary, or what is Santuario? There were 2 people who tried to define the term. One of those people was the priest. The priest said that sanctuary is not a legal concept. He said, and I quote, "This is a ministry of social justice." That's what the priest thinks sanctuary means. And then Juana was also asked that same question, and she responded to the question by saying, "Pedimos a Dios paciencia y que nos ayude a salir. Eso es santuario." Which translates to, we ask God for patience and that He allows us to get out of this free. That is what sanctuary is. Those 2 definitions are not the same, but one can argue that they go hand in hand. And there's one thing I can tell you, and that is that the priest is correct in so much as to say that there's no legal definition for sanctuary. Sanctuary is not a legal concept. You're not going to be able to find a definition in the Immigration and Nationality Act. You're not going to be able to find a definition in any code. It's not a legal concept. So if it's not a legal concept, then I think that we can either take the priest definition of what sanctuary is, or we can take what Juana thinks sanctuary is, or we can make up our own. The one thing that I think we can take away, or we see that is obvious, not only with Juana, but also with Minerva, there was a second woman that was featured in the film, and that is that even though sanctuary is not a legal term, somehow this term or this act of going into a church is protecting them from removal. both of these women, we learned throughout the film, had outstanding removal orders, and they were said to be sent back to home country, but the act of seeking sanctuary in a church kept them safe. Why is that? If sanctuary is a legal term, how come they got to be safe if they went to a church? The reason why they were allowed to be safe and sort of like off the hands of immigration and removal is not because immigration didn't know where they were at. You saw they had ankle bracelets. Both of the women had ankle bracelets. And you also, during one of the scenes, saw the church women discuss, it's not like ICE doesn't know where she's at. These are GPS tracked monitors, the things that they have on their ankles, so they know where they're at. The reason why ICE did not go to arrest, or has not gone to arrest Juana and didn't arrest Minerva, was because right now we have a memorandum in the immigration policies that designates what immigration calls sensitive locations. And essentially what this memo says is that it gives us a list of sensitive locations, and it says that because those locations are sensitive and so special, immigration is not going to go inside any of those buildings enlisted to make any apprehensions. And of course, churches are at the top of that list. The reason why arguably churches are at the top of the list is because we have a First Amendment right to practice our religion free of any fears or anybody interfering with that. So churches are at the top of the sensitive location list. You can also find schools as sensitive locations. So maybe you have heard here locally, for example, or when there were raids, that family members and children who were afraid of apprehension, they were being housed in both churches and a school. Schools are sensitive locations as well, and hospitals. You do not want to dissuade people from seeking medical help if they have an emergency going on. And so because of that memorandum, they're able to go to those sensitive locations and not be apprehended. Now, it's important for me to note that this is a memorandum, right? It's a policy, it's not a law. Because it's not a law, that means that Congress approval is not necessary to get away with it. Or in other words, if a particular administration wanted to get rid of that policy, of that memorandum, they can do away with it because it's not a law, so Congress approval is not necessary. Now, before we move on to tackling the other two questions that I had asked you to think about before we started watching the film, you might be asking yourself, we saw two women in the film. We saw Minerva and we saw Juana, and it was it was clear, and it was mentioned a couple of times, that Juana, the protagonist or the primary character of this short film, was the first person to ever go into sanctuary in North Carolina. Minerva was the second one. And you saw in the film that Minerva was able to get out of sanctuary. As a matter of fact, the religious person who was leading her sanctuary efforts came out publicly and announced that a judge had vacated her removal order, and so now she was allowed to leave the church and go back to her regular house. And if you do a little bit of Googling, you'll quickly find out that that happened 100 days after she had gone into sanctuary. Juana has been in sanctuary for over 3 years, and nothing similar has happened. Why could that be? The simple answer to that question is that each case is different. Each case has its own circumstances. Each person can be eligible for some type of relief and others cannot. The history or the immigration history that each person might have can affect how the path that an immigration case takes. In Juana's case, we know for a fact that she has had 2 entries into the US at least, right? She came when she was 20. She had a child who got really sick, so she had to go back, and then she re-entered. We don't know if Minerva is in a different situation. We don't know if, for example, Minerva was a victim of a violent crime and then was able to pursue a particular type of visa that perhaps Juana is not eligible for. There's a lot of unknowns, but what we do know, and something that we can take away, is that each case is different, and that unfortunately, adding media pressure and sympathy is not going to be enough to help a person, because both those women had family members and community members helping out and moving physically in person over social media. I think that both of them had an army of people rooting for them and helping out and wanting to air their stories. Juana has had this documentary made on to showcase her story, and yet that has not been enough. So the best conclusion that I can offer is that each case is going to be different. And I think this is a great way of moving on to one of the other questions that I had asked you to think about. Juana has 4 children, and she's married, has been married to Carlos for 23 years now, but that's going to be probably 26 now. And then she has grandchildren. The grandchildren, this is not a good practice as an attorney, but you can assume that they were born in the U.S., right? They speak like any person who would have been born here in the U.S. They carry themselves that way. If you do a quick Google search, you find out that Carlos, Juana's husband, is a U.S. citizen, and that 2 out of her 4 children are U.S. citizens. So you then ask yourself again, how come Juana has all these family members who can come in and out of the church who are not being targeted by immigration? How come none of them is filing a petition for her to get a visa? And that, if you're asking yourself that question, I think that's a really great question that has sort of a complicated answer, but the best way that I can explain it is that whether a person can seek a visa or a green card, it's a multi-step process that involves, of course, more than one question. The first question that a person has to ask themselves, if you're talking about whether a family member can petition for Juana, is whether you have what is called a qualifying familial relationship. That, in simple terms, means that immigration only allows certain family members to petition for others to live here in the US with them. For example, I made it a point to emphasize Juana's grandchildren. They seem to have a really good relationship. They seem to be really close to grandma. Well, unfortunately, a grandchild cannot petition for a grandmother to be able to stay here in the US. That is not a qualifying familial relationships. Without going into specifics, I can tell you qualifying familial relationships are things, for example, such as a US citizen husband or a US citizen wife. They can petition for an immigrant spouse to come to the US or to get a green card in the US. A US citizen child also can petition for a parent to come to the US, but that child has to be 21 years old or older. Younger children are not eligible to petition, are not able to petition, they're not adults, they're not able to petition for a parent to get a green card. They showed Carlitos on the film, and they didn't tell us how old he was, but he was the youngest, and he did look pretty young. So chances are that he might not be old enough to petition for mom just yet. So if you have ever heard the term anchor baby, or if you have ever thought about the fact that, immigrants come to this country, they have children so that they can just, their children can petition for them. I think this can give you an idea of that child would have to be 21 years old before they can petition for the parent. And then that's not the end of the road. That's not the end of the story, right? First, you have a qualifying familial relationship so that you can petition or file that first step. But then there comes a step where you have to be screened for eligibility. And in order for a person to be eligible to get a green card, that person has to be what it's called admissible. And admissible or inadmissibility is a legal term that we're not going to get into, but I can tell you that the simplest way of describing that is that the person has to have an absolutely squeaky clean record. They cannot have any violations on their record. If they have any violations, particularly immigration violations, of course criminal as well, right? But immigration violations, then they're not going to be able to just apply for a green card and get one. They might be subject to bars, inadmissibility bars of unlawful presence, for example. Those are huge ones, right? Which could mean that Juana, if the family member was able to petition for her, she would have to go back to home country and maybe stay abroad either 10 or 20 years before she could be able to come back into the country. And God knows if she's going to survive those 10 or 20 years if she was running away from violence in the first place. She was being targeted, right? So those are things that are not discussed here that I can quickly tell you. If she has had this level of media notoriety, more than likely already, not just one, probably an army of attorneys has looked at her case, and they've probably concluded that even if the spouse or any of her children could petition for her, she probably wouldn't be eligible for a visa or without having to go back to home country. And you might also be asking yourself, well, why doesn't she just go back to her home country then if that's the way that she's going to be allowed to come back in and actually have a green card? She probably doesn't want to go back to her home country because to her, like to many others, going back home can be a death sentence. Nobody out of their own volition and willingly goes into the room of a church and spends 3 years in there. I know that the church people are trying to make it as comfortable as possible. I know that they're doing everything that they can so that she feels at home, but she's not at home. She cannot work. She cannot live the life that she was living before. She, in a sense, is sort of like imprisoned, and she has chosen to do that over going back to her home country. Only she knows what she would be facing. Only she knows that perhaps going back means a lot more than being torn away from her family. It could definitely mean death. It's gotta be something very serious that they don't show in the film and that we don't know about, but many people are in similar situations. And I know that we are running out of time, so I want us to take discuss just very briefly again the last question that I posed, or one of the other questions that I posed, which was, she mentions that in 1992, if I remember correctly, she came into the country when she was 20 years old, running away from violence. And she must have had such a claim that she then pursued asylum right away. Right when she came into the country, she pursued asylum. The application was accepted, and she was granted a work permit, she says. So she was authorized to be in this country for as long as her asylum was pending, and she was being given this work permit. Typically, those work permits are given for about 2 years. She was required to report twice, once a year. She had been in full compliance with that until 2017, when instead of reporting back to her regular annual check-in, she was given a letter and told that she had 30 days to go back to her home country. This was in May, I can't remember if it was April or May of 2017. So something changed, right? She had been able to work while her asylum claim was pending. She doesn't say this, but at some point, I'm assuming her asylum application might have gotten denied. Yet she was still allowed to continue to be present here. She was not off the radar. She was checking in with immigration, with ICE once a year. But in 2017, she was told, this is no longer going to be available to you. You have to pack your bags in 30 days and go back to your home country. So her circumstances didn't change. Her life didn't change. What she was doing didn't change. How she was carrying herself didn't change. But what did change was the administration that we have. In 2017, with 2016, there was a change in administration. In 2017, a lot of our policies were changed. And what I can tell you from a neutral standpoint is that prior to 2017, there was something called priorities for deportation, or there were 4 priorities for removal for individuals. And so at the top were people that had criminal history, especially people that had felonies or had been convicted of violent crimes. Then after that, there was a category for people who had prior removal orders, people that had prior encounters with immigration. If you were a person with a relatively clean record and didn't have any criminal history, and you were just living here, paying taxes, and had a work permit, then you were not part of the part of the 4 priorities, and so you were allowed to continue to live life here. In 2017, there were a series of memorandums that the administration release that changed those priorities, and those 4 top priorities were done away with and were replaced with priorities that said that anybody who is living in the U.S. without a visa is a priority. It doesn't matter if they have any criminal history. It doesn't matter if they have any prior immigration history. It doesn't matter if they have family members who are here in the U.S. who depend on those immigrants. And so because of that change in priority, where now everyone who is here undocumented is a priority, that's how both Minerva and Juana became a priority. And so with that, I know that we are probably very close, if not over the time that I had. I don't know if anybody had any specific questions for me, anything that I might be able to answer either regarding the film or more from the immigration aspect, and perhaps why Juana might be in the situation that she is. No?
Roxana, this is Barbara. I'll just ask, do you see cases like this typically in your workplace?
So yes and no. I think that some of the cases that we have could end up in a similar situation. I think I haven't personally seen any, just because we are not at that stage just yet. In other words, immigration cases are taking so many years from the inception to conclusion that we are right now. I have a lot of cases that are just pending. We're waiting for a trial date. Or we have appealed, right? If we've lost, we've appealed, or we've won, and now we're off that grid. So I don't have any cases where we've had a person have to go into sanctuary, but certainly we have people who have sought asylum with us. We have people who have sought asylum on their own and lost because they have represented themselves and they don't know how to meet the standard of proof. They don't know how to put up a case together because they're not attorneys, right? And so we've helped with their appeals. If you are talking about the situation of the mother with the family who's just asking asking for an opportunity to stay here with their children and be able to work, I see that every single day of my practice. I think that's bread and butter. That's what I represent, and that's why I'm so passionate about doing what I do, because I know I'm representing people who are here just to make the world a better place.
Do you Roxana, it's not, oh, sorry, Barbara.
Go.
I was going to say, Roxana, it's not a question. It's just a comment. This is Lori Lothringer. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, the leadership in this space. It is very, very much appreciated. And for those of you that don't know, it is my privilege to count Roxana among our adjunct faculty. And Roxana has agreed to revamp and lead our very important immigration law program. And we just couldn't be more happy to have you. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Dean. So I think that's a perfect way of saying my last remarks that I was going to, or my last shout outs that I was going to give. So Barbara did mention that from typically 8 to 5, I work for the Immigrant Legal Center. I'm an attorney at that nonprofit. And of course, I also am an adjunct at Metro. And if you want, I would say, if you want to know a little bit more about how to help people who might be in a situation like Juana or Minerva, then I am inviting you to go visit our website at immigrant.lc.org. You're going to find ways there on how to donate, how to volunteer, how to get involved. There's, I think, a lot of ways in which you can help out. If you are joining us today because you're a student at Metro or because you are interested in taking classes, then I would invite you to take any of many classes that we offer at Metro that are immigration related. We have some classes that are super general for people who don't have any background. We also have classes that are more specialized and more narrow focused for those who already have some background and want to focus, for example, on family-based migration. And the classes are also in different platforms to allow the different needs of students. So we have some classes that are fully online mediated. Right now, I know I'm teaching a class that is remote learning. So it's a hybrid of online and then Zoom classroom. But for the pandemic, we also have in-person classes. So be sure to check out those classes. They're under the laws section of the catalog. And if you have any questions about either those classes or anything else, I think you can always feel free to email me at my Metro email, which is my initial and last name, rcortes-mills@mcc.neb.edu or mccneb.edu. I'll put her in the chat box.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Roxana Cortes-Mills for her very thorough, but I guess I would say the way you describe things, everybody can understand. And that was very helpful because I know that immigration is very confusing to our public. It's heart-wrenching when we see stories like this, but I think you simply helped us to understand what some of the challenges are. And of course, it's a very deep topic, so much more could be learned, and you've provided that opportunity also. Thank you all for your attendance. We're going to put up a couple of slides here, I believe. Jason can show us where you can complete an online evaluation with recognitions for continued attendance throughout the year at mccneb.edu/IIE-eval. And then if you'd also put up the next slide of our following presentation. This will be held Thursday, October 1st. Life Lessons and a Mystic Journey on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage. If you don't know what that is, check it out. You could do a little research, but Reverend Ernesto Medina is going to share with us his experience in Spain on the Camino, a pilgrimage that is followed by thousands and thousands of people annually. We hope that you will consider joining us Thursday, 2:30 to 3:30. The Zoom address is there. If you need any more information about that, you can send me a chat message and we'll get that back to you. Thank you very much. Thanks again to the libraries that help us get our videos and make sure that the public performance is set up. And finally, big thanks again to Roxana for her beautiful work with us and the work that she does on a daily basis with the Immigrant Legal Center. Wish you all well and see you the next time.